In this video, we're going to be using the Silhouette Studio Designer Edition with one of our fonts that have a sticky flock weed box. We're going to show you how to work with that style of font here inside Silhouette Studio Designer Edition because it's actually quite easy to do. So let's just go ahead and type out some text. So we'll type out some text here. And then we're going to pick a particular font. And the font that we're going to be working with is EST Athletic Mini. So now you can see what we have here. So what we need to do is we need to be able to convert all of our rhinestones here to a specific size, depending on what size font that we actually want to cut. So typically what we would do in this particular situation is you go ahead and type out the entire alphabet and then do the size conversion all at once. And then you could go ahead and cut this out, and then you'd have the individual letters to make up whatever wording that you needed to make up. So in order to reset our stone sizes to a perfect size for whatever size rhinestone we want to use for this, when we originally created the font, yes, we created it using Ss10 size, but of course we can use whatever size we want to. But we would have to resize this accordingly. So let me show you how this works. So the first thing we want to do is once you have your text type out, you can see we have our stones and our individual weed boxes. So we're going to right click, and there's this option that's lit up, it's ungroup. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to ungroup. Now what that's going to do is that's going to make every letter individual. So initially all the letters were grouped together. But now what we want to do is we want to separate the rhinestones from the weed box. So to do that, we're just going to select everything. We're going to right click, and we're going to choose the release compound path. And you can see these little tiny boxes around each individual stone, and of course around the weed box itself. Now, by default, you may get something that looks drastically different than what we're seeing here. And so let's talk a little bit about our preferences. If we go into the edit menu and look at preferences, and we come over here to our selection preferences, depending on what options we have chosen, you may get a very different result. So so you can see here, one of the changes I made was to select shapes that are enclosed by drag box. And the other option is to select shapes that are touching a drag box. And so if I were to just come over here and make a drag box and I'm just touching a weed box, see, it doesn't get selected because I don't have that option. If I were to choose that option and then hit apply and then make my selection and I just touch the weed box, boom, it gets selected, which in this case, I don't want that. So it's a matter of personal preference probably, but I like to have the option here to select shapes by enclosed drag box. Now, what I don't know, because I don't know a great deal about Silhouette Studio because I don't use it, in CorelDRAW we have a similar functionality by default. When we make a marquee selection, it has to be completely enclosed within the drag box. And then in CorelDRAW we have an option where if we hold down the Alt key, then it can just touch the drag box. And I don't know if Silhouette Studio has an equivalent for that or not, or if you have to come in here to preferences and switch back and forth. Not 100% certain on that. Now, the other thing is when we make our selection, we have this crazy nonsense. And so that can be quite confusing in a big hurry. Obviously, that's not very useful. So we have some other options here where we can choose a single bounding box. Let's go ahead and choose apply there. And now when we make our selection, the bounding box is just one bounding box for our selection. And so that's typically what you'll probably want to use as well. Let's go back into preferences, make sure I think we have everything set now the way it should be. One thing that I did find that I thought was kind of unusual, you could see it's not checked now. Neither option's checked, but it still works. So I'm not sure why it doesn't retain that setting, but that's really neither here nor there. All right, so let's switch over to our rhinestone panel here. And what we want to do now is we want to select just the stones themselves. So we'll just come in here and make a selection, just the stones themselves. So we're not going to quite go all the way to the top where we have our weed boxes. And if I move these away, then you'll see I have just the stones themselves selected. And now we can decide, well, what size stones do we want to use for this particular project. So the first example I want to show you is Ss10 stones. So we have the Ss10s already selected, but we don't have what effect we want to be applied. And the effect that we want to apply is the edge effect. So we'll go ahead and choose that. Now, if you look here, you can see that these stones are quite close together in this example. If I select everything now, so now I'm selecting stones and weed boxes, and I stretch this out, watch what happens. If you look at the overall height, now we're about an inch high. Let's make it bigger. Now if you look, you can see that the actual circle size did not change size, but you can see the spacing between stones increased. And that's an important distinction. So once you have those set to stones, edge, then we can just visually by eye, we can decide how close, if you go really crazy, you can get the stones really overlapping. So you can depend on how big or how much spacing you want between each of your stones. So just by simply dragging it, but of course you want to drag the weed boxes right along with it as well. So this should be the way it was designed. The font itself is roughly an inch tall. So these should be just a little bit over an inch tall with the weed box. But anyhow, that's how you can go reset that. Now, if we want to, we can create the same font in any stone size we want. So I can come in here, and again, we're going to select just our stones. And let's say I want the same font, but I really want it tiny for Ss6 stones. So we can go ahead and select that, and then we can cut out an Ss6 variation of it. So if I scroll it down now and scale our stones down, so now it's going to be roughly 3/4 of an inch tall. This font would be roughly 3/4 of an inch tall, which would be really good for keychains or car decals where we need a really small font that's actually quite legible. So anyhow, you could switch that back and forth and use any of the different stone sizes here inside Silhouette Studio. So hopefully that will give you a better idea of how to take advantage of this font or any font that from any vendor. They all work the same. That if you have a sticky flock weed box, remember we have to ungroup it. We have to release that compound path, and then we have to go in, possibly change your preferences to select only what is fully selected, not just touching that selection. So we can just pick up just the rhinestones, and then we use that edge option to convert those circles to actual rhinestones. Thanks for watching.